Well, welcome everybody to this evening. My name is Shelley Repp, and I am chair of the Committee of 100 on the Federal City. The committee was founded just over 100 years ago to sustain and safeguard the fundamental values that give our nation's capital much of its distinction, beauty, and rich community character. 2023 was our centennial year, and to mark that milestone, we held a series of events which we called conversations that focused on some of our city's biggest challenges. The 7 conversations from last year are posted on our YouTube channel. I think the link is on your program, right? But you can watch the programs from last year. These conversations were so interesting and informative that we decided to do 2 more this year. Originally, we had planned on doing 2 separate topics. And as some of you know, and maybe we're here, we had a conversation back in April 24th on downtown. Very topical subject. As we thought through this more, we decided that maybe we should have a part 2 of our conversation on downtown. So that's what we're here tonight for. For tonight's event, we have 3 distinguished speakers. The first one is coming through by Zoom. The other 2 are here in person to address the present and future challenges of downtown. Very brief biographies of each are in your program. Each of the 3 participants will make brief opening remarks, and then we'll have a conversation among, I think we're going to need a 4th chair here. No, we don't, because he's up here. Never mind. What am I thinking? Then we'll have a conversation moderated by Carol Ayton. After that, there'll be an opportunity for questions from the audience. After the program, please join us for refreshments and conversation in the lobby. Committee of 100's members are identified by badges like the one on my coat, and we invite all of you to talk to any of us to learn more about our organization. We welcome new members. Okay, moving on. For our first speaker, we are pleased to welcome Paul Levy. Paul was the CEO of Philadelphia's Center City District for 33 years. That's pretty remarkable, 33 years, before retiring last year. Philadelphia's Central City District is comparable to the downtown bid that we have here, and maybe the Golden Triangle bid also. So his so-called retirement now includes being chair of the board of the Center City District and executive director of the Center City District Foundation, as well as teaching in Penn's Graduate City Planning Department and serving on the boards of several civic organizations, including Philadelphia's Convention and Visitors Bureau. He is widely recognized for his work in turning Philadelphia's Center City into a welcoming and prospering place, and has agreed to share some of his undoubtedly hard-earned wisdom with us. So with that, we'll turn this over to Paul, who's coming by Zoom.
Well, thank you very much. And I have to apologize first. I feel a little hypocritical and guilty coming to you remotely when I'm going to be advocating a return to the office in the downtown. But I am getting on an airplane with my wife tomorrow to Athens, Greece. And since I put so many things off, I thought it would be safer to do this. So I'm going to share my screen and go through a series of slides very, very quickly to talk about what I see as the issues and challenges that all of our cities are facing at this point. Are my slides visible at this point? Is that a yes? Okay. So I obviously want to pick up on your theme on sort of the recovery process and rethinking and reshaping our city centers. This is a project that we started about a year and a half ago, which was an analysis of the 26 largest downtowns in the United States. And I want to draw on that I want to draw on the experience of the creation of our improvement district and having run it, as you've heard, for 33 years. And I want to comment on your downtown development plan and your action highlights. I think the first thing to talk about very clearly is that the process that we went through during the pandemic clearly was one that disrupted what had been a very, very powerful momentum, which we had job growth in the decade before the pandemic, and all of our cities really diversified as places to live, work, and play. I'm going to slightly reformat my screen because I can't see all of it, so I apologize. Is that still visible to everyone? I apologize if it's off a little bit. Give me 1 second to fix that. All right, I'll go this way. What we saw, are you able to see those? Is that a yes? Okay, I apologize. All right, so we had arts, entertainment, and sports, and all of that really grew robustly in our downtown. And then the pandemic of 2020, we saw this complete loss of life. All but essential businesses were directed to close, and downtowns across the country and across the world really emptied out. Washington, D.C., like many cities, became a ghost town. What we saw across the country is about a 70 to 80% drop in pedestrian traffic in our city centers. Those of us old enough to remember the horror and emptiness after 9/11, that was obviously time limited and site specific to the attacks in New York and Washington, D.C. What was unique about this in 2020 was a shutdown and health concerns that lasted 18 months or more, almost everywhere. Nearly all of our downtowns lost a significant amount of private sector jobs during that period of time. And of course, the very technology I'm using tonight was very quickly deployed, and the pandemic in many ways was an accelerator of trends. Many quickly claimed that the office is dead, that we can rely on the virtual water cooler, and there was an entire academic industry that we were saying we were entering an urban doom loop. Many newspapers wrote this story 3 to 4 times. I love this quote from Mark Twain: "The reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated," and that is true for all of our downtowns. Recovery has been happening almost everywhere. In our study of 26 downtowns, compared the first quarter of this year to the first quarter of 2029, looking at residents, workers, and visitors, and they were back at 93% in San Jose and 68% in San Francisco. But before cheering for San Jose and weeping for San Francisco, the story is a lot more nuanced. If you look at the top 26 largest downtowns, you will see that they range from San Jose at 93%, San Francisco at 68%, and Washington slightly below the median at 77%. This is workers, visitors, and residents combined. We found really 5 very big variables. 1, the composition of the downtown economy. 2, the length of work commuters commute, the leadership exercised by business, civic, and political leadership, perceptions of safety, the patterns and quality of downtown land use. And while safety has dominated the headlines, we frankly do not think it is the most important variable. This is obviously a complex and multivariate situation. Number 1, the composition of downtown employment. Working from home is most prevalent in the tech, finance, and professional and business services industries, least prevalent in hospitality and food services. Different downtowns specialize and excel in different industries, and there are significant variations in recovery based on that. One concern I think you have in Washington is a probable overdependence on one sector, and I will come back to that. If you look at the recovery rate just for non-resident workers, you can see at the top there are San Antonio, San Jose, and San Diego. Washington is at 61% return as of the end of March 31. If you think about San Antonio, Nashville, and San Diego, they have their largest share of employment in hospitality and entertainment, jobs that cannot easily be performed remotely. If you look at the ones that are at the very, very bottom, you see Denver, San Francisco, and Portland. These are in cities that excel in information technology, a sector long comfortable with remote work. So industry mix matters as a determinant. Now, visitor industries have recovered the most, and visitors in this Methodology equals shoppers, diners, tourists, patients, people coming to music venues, convention centers, sports. They're simply people who neither live nor work in the downtown. Visitors were obviously the first to disappear, but they're much easier than workers to bring back. The decision to shop, dine, or be a tourist obviously requires far less commitment than signing a lease or commuting 4 to 5 days a week. Now, overall, pre-pandemic, 60% of people present in the 26 downtowns were visitors. Workers constituted about a third, and residents were 7.3%. If you look at the recovery rate of visitors, you'll see that Washington, which has a robust visitor industry, is much better here. You're tied in ninth with Dallas and Chicago, no longer below the median. But all the industries that really fill our office buildings really are the ones that we've had the hardest trouble with at this point. So there are also, number two, significant differences in the rate of return based on the distance and mode of commuting. Almost 60% of downtown workers in Midtown Manhattan live there. And in Midtown Manhattan, those who live within 2 miles are back at 104%. That is more than they're back than before. Those who live 10 miles away are only back at 60%. In Boston, you see the same disparity. If you live within 2 miles of work, back at 93%, live 10 miles away or more, you're back at 56%. Same is true, you see that split in Philadelphia. San Francisco, the least recovered city, has an 86% return rate among those who live within 2 miles away, but only 40% much further away. So the live-work downtowns we've all been building in the last 2 decades are really yielding recovery dividends. In Washington, you have that same differential, but your recovery rate of those people closer in is only at 80%. And I think it is related to the high concentration of federal government employment. We can talk about that. So yes, converting vacant office buildings to residential use, I think, is a very important and necessary step. Because Philadelphia, frankly, has been a slow growth city, we had to deal with this issue back in the 90s. We passed a 10-year tax abatement in 1997. And in the years since then, we converted 40 major office buildings to residential use, took 10 million square feet of office space out of the market. And I draw this red line here because I know many people are worried about lost tax revenues, but everything below the red line is fully back now on the tax rolls for the city. So you give something away in order to get something back. So we call it an office district, but we've added a significant number of residential buildings in that district. We've added a significant number of hotels. So we've dramatically diversified the downtown. So we have 201,000 downtown residents and 280 to 300,000 downtown jobs. As was said in this last session of yours, long-term success is about creating a mixed-use city center, and single-use blocks are a formula for failure. Now, overall, the average in our cities where residents were only 7.3% of the downtown, so I don't want to over-exaggerate that. But when you compare 2019 to 2023, visitors stayed constant, about 60%. Workers contracted from 32% to 27%, but the residential share of people downtown grew from 7.3 to 11.2%. We're moving in the right direction. So the more you have downtown residents, the closer they live to work, the higher your return to office. Those things interact with each other in a very positive way. 3, the importance of leadership. I've talked about the importance of bringing back office jobs, and this is our biggest challenge. But these are our dense containers of the most diverse jobs. We did this calculation in Philadelphia. For every 500,000 square feet of office space, yes, there are 3,300 office jobs, but there are 18 cleaners, 12 security positions, 11,000 hotel rooms get generated. You can see the retail demand. Many blue-collar urban jobs depend on the presence of office workers. So quite simply, remote work may not be consistent with inclusive growth. One needs to keep that in mind. 63% of our downtown jobs require less than a college degree. So inclusiveness for us, 25% of the working residents of our neighborhoods work in the downtown. The revitalization of our city centers is thus essential. Now, this is where leadership matters. It's the choices between this and this the office loses. Working from home, however, comes with its own challenges. The Gensler firm continues to talk about the office as a destination, not as an obligation. So increasing amenities within the office, providing guest speakers, providing mentoring for staff, providing the opportunity to interact, but also higher quality office equipment and technology than people can get at home. Now, let me be clear, the duration of working from home was extremely long. It was reported that even Santa Claus had a hard time getting his workers back. And to be serious, you go back and look at major pandemics. In the Black Plague, half of the workforce of Europe died, and their bargaining power was dramatically increased. So think about current conditions, nowhere near extreme, but the bargaining power between employer and employees has changed. So office is destination, not obligation. We continue to support this by doing events outside office buildings, promoting a safe environment, welcoming office workers back with free coffee outside, and all sorts of events. I know I'm running short on time, but perceptions of safety. When we ask people about competitiveness, the number one thing they said is improve public safety. Now, we've had a very robust program of security, of cleaning, of outreach throughout the downtown, of collaboration, cleaning sidewalks, making sure the downtown is really in great condition. But when we asked people, did they feel safe? Less than a majority of people last year felt safe downtown. Now, this is a long-term trend. We had an 80% feel safe in the mid part of the last decade. You can see it steadily decline. Then you see it plummet in 20 and 21 and 22. Now, the reality is serious crime is actually down in Center City, but perception is the problem. And when you ask people, it is homelessness, aggressive panhandling, ATVs. Crime is actually fifth on the list. So we added bike patrols, we doubled our public safety deployment, and we are bringing back perceptions of safety. We've added homeless outreach teams in partnership with our lead homeless provider, but clearly public safety itself needs to change. No longer police as warriors, but community policing is part of what needs to happen as well. I'll wrap up quickly here, the quality of the public environment. We've been greening Center City for years, upgrading our retail districts, but we've done even more during this period of time, making the Center City area clean, safe, and green. Finally, I was inspired by your session last time. The form of the city matters. Your plan compared to our plan. We have a very intimate scale, walkable grid. It gives us a Jane Jacobs style city of lots of small doors and openings. Your McMillan plan is not dissimilar to our Gerbert plan for City Beautiful. The problem with City Beautiful is you have a lot of empty spaces in between. We spent 20 years building parks to fill in empty spaces between the monumental buildings, to program activities, to take spaces that were barren, including at our Center Square, Dilworth Park. We completed a $60 million renovation, do ice skating, roller skating, summer fountains. We're back up to 88% of our prior visitors. So to wrap up, I see 5 key variables. The composition of downtown employment matters. The length of commute for workers matters. The leadership exercised by business matters. Addressing public safety and addressing the quality and the nature of downtown land use. We have a lot of work to do, but it's time for all of us to get to work and do this. Apologies for running slightly over.
Well, thank you, Paul. You did a heck of a job making it through 125 slides. That was pretty remarkable. Also, I mean, one takeaway for me is the nature of the work to bring people downtown, workers downtown. I mean, where should we be targeting? Maybe Leona can talk about that in a minute. Who should we be targeting as far as what types of jobs to create downtown? Because as we heard, tech workers prefer to work at home, right? So that's new. Okay, anyway, thank you, Paul. Okay, moving on. Our second speaker is Leona Agouridis. Did I get that right? Leona is president and CEO of DC's Golden Triangle Business Improvement District, which covers 44 block area from the White House to DuPont Circle and Washington Circle, DuPont Circle and Washington Circle, and includes 3 of the 5 nodes identified in the Downtown Action Plan released back in February. Under her leadership, the Golden Triangle, where I used to work, area has become cleaner, safer, greener, artier, and more welcoming. We hope she will outline what must happen next to bring 24/7 life and full occupancy to the Golden Triangle and downtown. Leona? Yes, there's the clicker.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe she could just use it.
Best you do it from here because
Oh, but I can't see it from there.
we're filming this
Oh,
as you walk around.
okay. Well, I'll do it this way so I can see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Great. I'm going to talk, I was asked to talk to you about our placemaking efforts in the Golden Triangle, and then I'll take you from that. I'll take you through an evolution, essentially, to placemaking in the future and where we're going to be focused a lot more. I am having... Okay, all right, great. And I just skipped. Okay, I started with this one because this is a signature Golden Triangle look. This is the Connecticut Avenue median. It was our first project. One thing that you will note, Paul talked about greening. Greening is very important in our environment because of the number of large office buildings. However, whenever we approach placemaking, there's always an additional purpose. And in this case, it was to close up the mid-block crossings on Connecticut Avenue. It's not a very pedestrian-friendly area, so that was one of our goals. But we also worked within the spirit of the font plan to kind of create this amazing visual sloping up towards DuPont. The next slide, okay, there's a lag too. The next slide is our rain gardens on 19th Street. 19th Street is our food destination. We wanted to make it more welcoming for people. We wanted to green it. And 19th Street is a biohabitat area. We have rain gardens along basically 6 block faces and educational materials along. So it not only makes it a nicer place for people to come and linger, but also has a huge environmental impact. The water from it does go down into the combined sewer system, so this is very important. I think we might have some battery issues. Okay. Golden Haiku, this is my favorite. This is the largest haiku competition in the world. We get people from about 117 countries, I think we had this past year, and all 50 states to compete. And every year people wait for it. And the poetry is really nice as you're walking along city streets. We're the people who brought the Art of Burning Man in collaboration with the Smithsonian Renwick, which was just amazing and phenomenal. This is a project that we did with the Embassy of Germany during the height of COVID in Farragut Square, and it's appropriately called Love Hate, because hate can become love and love can become hate, and it really was a commentary on the times that we were living in. Another project by an artist, Valérie Theberge, at one of our rain gardens. So now, how did things change during COVID? Well, they changed pretty significantly. We have probably about 30 windows throughout the Golden Triangle covered with art because they're vacant. And we had 120 retail vacancies during the height of COVID and through most of COVID. It's going in to today. Then we decided that important part of placemaking is what's happening on the ground floor, and that's something we never had to do before, and because the landlord took care of that, right? And here we had this program that we started. It's called Grow Golden, with small local businesses. This is April Richardson. Her shop is 9010. It's DC Sweet Potato Cake. We brought in 12 retailers for a 3-month period, and 6 of them are still there after a couple years, right? This is a pop-up art gallery that we brought through the Grow Golden program, and he's still there. He's going to be there 3 months, and it's been about 2.5 years. Rorschach Theater, that's in the former Big and Tall space, the Lerner Building at the corner of Connecticut and L. They came in for one show, and now they've been there. They're working on their fourth show. But what we're really trying to do is that the streets, especially in a large institutional looking neighborhood, they can look big and empty and gray. And so it's going to take a long time to change the built environment. It's going to take a long time to bring retailers. And so we've stepped into the question of what can we do to make this a more livable place for people. Bring them theater, bring them places to eat, make it interesting. Next slide. There we go. Oops. Okay, Artomatic, we brought them at a building at 2100 M. I'm sure you'll have some questions about that building. That building will become residential, and it's right at the intersection of the Golden Triangle and the West End. Fringe Festival is coming soon to Connecticut Avenue. One of the blocks is about 75% vacant retail, and that's going to activate those spaces in July. I want to linger on for a second, because now we're starting to get into the transition of what do we look like as we become a more residential neighborhood. And it will take time. It will take a lot of time to change the built environment. The 20th and L is where our very first residential building conversion will be. And you see it up in the corner there. That is the L. It will deliver, hopefully the ribbon cutting will be July 11th. It has 163 units. Used to be the Peace Corps building. And luckily, it had emptied out right before COVID, and it was going to be another office building. The owner tried to get financing, couldn't make it work for another office building, and decided to really take a leap and do this. But those of you who know 20th Street, south of DuPont, it's really sparse. And so what we wanted to do as a bid is kind of put out a welcome mat. And that's what I call this. The tree boxes were tiny, the trees were constrained, and we worked with DDOT, who grew the tree boxes. We hired a landscape architect. Now, what you see here is a rendering, so because it's not quite finished yet. We hired a landscape architect to make this into biohabitats. And so we're going to be welcoming not only people, but also pollinators. And the biohabitats will have educational signage in them so that people can kind of walk along and read them and learn how to do things in their own garden. But we wanted to do this because we tried to put ourselves in the shoes of the people that would be living in this apartment building. And, you know, what do they do? You know, where do they go to sit? This particular block is not close to a lot of parks, and we do have several smaller parks in the Golden Triangle, but how do we give people a little bit of green space? So now we're transitioning into the future. Paul mentioned the Downtown Action Plan, and the general premise is that life has changed. There will be more return to office. I don't think we've gotten right to the beginning, to the top, to the pinnacle, but we're close. Right? I think we're kind of in a somewhat steady state. And so the premise of this is we need to grow demand for the built environment from other areas. And so we're, you know, converting office to residential. That's part of it. Attracting additional universities. We've had a huge growth in university presence in the Golden Triangle, 6 university presences in the last 8 years. Growing tech community and innovation. We cannot be the same old economy that we were before, and increasing availability of arts, culture, and entertainment. The other premise of the Downtown Action Plan is it's not one monolithic downtown, but a collection of nodes. The 3 that I listed here in bold are in the Golden Triangle, linking the parks together, Farragut, McPherson, and Black Lives Matter Plaza with Lafayette Park, creating Downtown West, an arts and culture district, leveraging the big project that's being done at the National Geographic to redevelop it. And this is my favorite, the Penn West Equity, Innovation, and University District. And the goal of Penn West, I'm going to skip through these because I don't have much time, I've been told, but I did want to talk about Penn West because Pennsylvania Avenue west of the White House, if you think of it, has the White House, it has the World Bank, it has the IMF, it has the IFC, it has the EU, and not too far from it is the State Department. We should be the place of choice for companies from throughout the world to come here and be there. And we have a huge international community in this region, and they want and need places to be as well. This is a huge opportunity in my mind. And so lots of things getting ready to happen, but I think one of the most exciting things is that we just launched a global soft landing program in coordination with DEMPED, the Economic Partnership, GW University, and a group called the Open Avenue Foundation to kind of create and make it easier to bring in global business. But we would be using our parks to celebrate culture, and we're already getting into this. You see the Chilean dancers there. We've been citing art in conjunction with embassies for a couple years now. We've worked with Poland, Germany. We'll be working with Spain and Australia this year. We've also worked with Belgium. But it's a great opportunity, I think, to take our city to local city, national capital, and I think global leader. And I'm so excited by this project. So that's it.
Let me introduce you here first. She's so eager to speak here. So anyway, thank you, Leona. Hopefully, as the evening goes along, we'll hear more about the office to residential conversions. I know you talked about the Peace Corps building, which is sort of the signature example here, but I know the mayor talks there's 4 or 5 others. Also, as far as the Committee of 100 goes, we're hoping that there'd be affordable housing units in those downtown units that are being converted. Anyway, one comment here is after the next presentation, we will move into our panel discussion. Carol Ayton is the moderator. She's a longtime Committee of 100 member and trustee and co-chairs our planning committee. Okay, our final speaker here is Tracy Hadden, who is a fellow with the Ann T. and Robert M. Bass Center for Transformative Placemaking at Brookings Metro. Dr. Lowe loves cities and keeps her finger and pulse of cities on the pulse of cities and downtowns. She is on the board of the Greater Washington and WMATA. And speaking of WMATA, I know her father, and he told me maybe 18 months ago that Tracy, who's working at Brookings, works full time trying to save Metro. That was what he told me. Maybe that was an exaggeration, and maybe things are better than that. But anyway, little anecdote. We hope she will share her views on the future of downtown. Tracy?
Thank you so much. I will share my views, but I'm also here today to share with you the findings from a research project that I've been working on for the last year, where, I was seeing, let's see, is this going to work to advance slides? Is there something I should aim at? I was seeing these kinds of headlines, and I thought, seems bad, right? So, I study commercial real estate, and downtowns are therefore of interest because there are these huge collections of office buildings. And so I decided to go out and talk to some people about what was actually going on. And I went to New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Seattle and interviewed over 100 people across a variety of stakeholder categories, people who own office buildings in those downtowns, people like Paul Levy, people who live in downtowns, major employers, etc. And I just asked them what was going on, what they were doing in response, and what they thought might happen in the future. And as part of that project, we uncovered some disconnects between perception and reality that Paul has kind of already alluded to, that are some of which are from the headlines, but some of which are even in the minds of, people who are experts and spend a lot of time downtown. And so I'm here today to just share with you these 5 ways that we discovered people are confused, or to be spicy, wrong about the future of downtowns. And the good news is that there's a lot that we can do in order to ensure the future vitality of downtown cities and regions. I think that we're not in a doom loop that is just gonna like suck us down to the bottom of a pit of quicksand or something. Okay, so Paul already talked about this, that crime is dominating a lot of the discourse about what is happening to cities and downtowns right now. And we heard this in every single city that we visited. This was in the fall of 2022. And so, those of you who are familiar with what was going on with national crime trends at the time can understand why it was really front of mind. But it was also really front of mind in the media. Okay, but this is what we saw when we actually looked at the data in terms of what's happening with crime. So this is citywide crime trends in each of the 4 cities that we studied. And then I also went ahead and added DC just for you guys. It was really terrible that I actually looked up real numbers just for this presentation. Okay, and so what do we see here? That in the cities that I did those interviews in, actually, crime was pretty stable. In the district, if I had done these interviews in the fall of 2022, actually, crime would have been down from prior to the pandemic. And so the general takeaway here is that there isn't one narrative that explains what's happening in the United States with crime right now, right? Like when I look at these graphs, I have a lot of different questions that clearly show that there are different things happening in different places. Like first off, why is New York so safe? It has much lower rates of both violent and property crime than other cities. That's one question that I have. Okay, another one is, what happened in DC last year? That's another one that really jumps out. How did Philadelphia reduce violent crime? That seems like something that could be really important to know. But what happened in Philadelphia with property crime? That also seems like a problem. And then finally, what's always been going on in Seattle with property crime? So my point here, though, is that there are very different crime contexts across different cities, and there isn't a kind of a one-size-fits-all like explanation for what's going on or what to do about it, because there are different things happening in different places, and it probably has to do with varying economic conditions, but also with varying policy environments around what cities are doing about crime. To follow up on Paul's point, when I look at only crimes that are happening in the downtowns of these places, what we found is that, first off, downtowns are very safe. Even though they're in our interviews, we heard this very broad public perception that downtowns were dangerous and that they were falling apart and people didn't want to return to the office because of crime. That's what we were consistently told in all 4 cities. What we actually see is that downtowns are very safe and that violent crime actually declined in 2 of the 4 downtowns that we studied over our study time period. And even in the downtowns where there was an increase in crime, in part that's because the baseline of crime is so low, right? Like if there's only 1 crime somewhere and then the next year there's 2 crimes, crime doubled. But it's only 2 crimes. It's still pretty good, right, compared to the city as a whole. Another thing that I think is really notable here is that you can see how safe downtown DC is relative to other cities. It's just really astonishing how incredibly safe our downtown is relative to other major cities. How many people here feel like that matches your perception of downtown DC? I am seeing some hands. I'm seeing some hands, which that's good. So that means we have here a convergence of perception and reality that does not exist in many other cities. Okay, the second reason that everyone is wrong. I am an elder millennial, so I have to communicate using memes. It's the only way I know how to talk. So this is a meme called Galaxy Brain, and I'm showing here the 5 stages of office to housing enlightenment. Offices are over. Too many offices were bad anyway. Demand from residents is going to replace demand from workers. And because cities are about to go broke, we have to do this in order to solve the housing crisis. But every single step in this meme is wrong. In reality, office use continues. It's not too many offices, it's too little of everything else, right? What Paul was talking about, all the spaces in our monumental designs, all the dead spaces. Housing strengthens demand for offices and other stuff like restaurants and retail. Many residential tax bases, including the districts, are stronger than ever. So though the DC is in fiscal trouble, it is not about to go broke. And office conversions are a pricey way to add a fraction of the housing that we need. So actually, we need to think bigger about housing than office to residential conversion. Okay, I am on the board of WMATA, so I have to say a little bit about the future of transit, right? So the other thing that I heard is that no one is using transit anymore. And actually, I hear this around DC all the time too. I hear people say like, "Oh, I don't want to," or I don't do that anymore. But the actual reality is that WMATA is at about 75%, 3/4 of our pre-pandemic ridership, and we're currently having a ridership record pretty much every week. And how many people are surprised to hear that in Seattle, a city with a very high rate of working from home, the transit system there is already above the pre-pandemic level of ridership. So I'm not going to get into this and litigate it super hard right now. My point here is just that when we look at the data, we see something different from the perception that we don't need transit anymore and we can just let it go. What we see here is actually that transit remains relevant and that it has growth potential. Okay, and then finally, homelessness. This is the other one that when people say they're worried about crime downtown, what we found out is that what they actually mean is they're worried about homelessness downtown. And that what happened during the pandemic was people saw homeless people in places where they weren't used to seeing them, in places where they hadn't seen them before. And they also saw homeless people in conditions that they weren't used to seeing them before because of the rise of fentanyl. And so that is a different problem than a crime problem, and it requires a different policy response. And the good news is that policy responses actually work, right? The reason why homelessness is 20 times worse in New York and San Francisco than it is in Houston is not because there's no people in Houston. It's because the policies that are in place in Houston are very different from the policies that are in place elsewhere. And so I'm showing that here, that in Houston, one single regional continuum of care coordinates all federal funding and all service providers who are working to end homelessness. Whereas in a city like Atlanta, and our map looks just like this too, I didn't make you guys a special map, but ours looks like this too, is an incredibly fragmented continuum of care in which we pretend that homelessness in Prince George's County has different causes and solutions than homelessness in the District of Columbia, for example. That is definitely not true. Finally, to end on Paul's point about foot traffic, raise your hand if you think that Las Vegas has the #1 most vibrant and successful downtown in the United States. One person raised their hand, and it's cool if you think that, but usually no one raises their hands because what a downtown is for and who it's for is not something that is measured just using foot traffic. So we shouldn't get discouraged if we see, oh, DC, it's only at 70% of its pre-pandemic foot traffic or whatever. this is a meaningful metric to watch, but we have bigger fish to fry than just trying to juice this number and get it up as high as possible. Because as Paul pointed out, the vast majority of foot traffic in a typical US downtown, both before and after the pandemic, is casual visitors. And I'm not sure that's the primary constituency that we're trying to solve downtowns for. But if it is, there's a lot we could do with the basics, like wayfinding and like the vision that the city has for Chinatown, that would make our downtown extraordinarily attractive to visitors. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit to pick here. So what to do about it? We gotta do something way smarter about crime. Instead of getting rid of all of our offices downtown, we should get rid of the offices everywhere else and move those jobs to the downtown. We should fix WMATA. We should do what works to prevent homelessness. Actually, a lot of people in this building are trying to do the right things. We should listen to them more. And finally, we should think about who we are creating this recovery for and be intentional about including more people in the downtown coalition than we have historically.
Well, okay, thank you, Tracy. Seems to me that encouraging people to bring more jobs from the burbs to downtown, that might be a steep challenge here, but I hope it's right. I hope it happens. Okay, at the end of the discussion, we're going to have, there'll be time for questions and answers. And unlike in the past, we're going to do a little bit different this evening. Aiden is going to take the handheld microphone. So you'll raise your hand and Aiden will find you and bring the mic over to you.
And remember, if you don't use the mic, Paul can't hear you.
Yes, absolutely. Good point. And also another caveat here is try to keep your questions and comments brief so that there's time for everybody. So with that, Carol, time for the moderate discussion.
Well, thank you. I actually want to start out with sort of the big thorny question that Shelley raised before. And I think I'll aim it at you, Tracy, but others who want to join in, please feel free. And Paul, I'm not sure how you're going to signal us, but just, say something and we'll listen. So a lot of talk about residents, a lot of questions about who are the residents going to be? Are they families? Is it mixed income? Is it affordable housing? There is no inclusionary zoning requirement in downtown. Is there any way, hope, possibility of getting the kind of mixed income housing we'd like to see, including affordable housing? And how would we go about that?
Sure. I think that inclusionary zoning isn't a good way to produce affordable housing because it basically requires the other people who live in the building to pay for the units of those with lower incomes, when actually the need to provide affordable housing is a whole of society challenge, and the cost should be borne by the whole of society, not the people who happen to live in a particular building. So the challenge is that because downtown land is very valuable and office to residential conversion is costly, that adding additional costs, like subsidizing the rents of some people who live in a building, makes the economics challenging. So we should instead address the costs, those inputs to housing production, and try to drive some of those down so that we can produce more affordable housing. And it seems to me that the most obvious thing is that there's a huge concentration of publicly owned buildings in the downtown that are no longer needed. So legislation was recently introduced on the House side and the Senate side, just by Democrats. It's going to need bipartisan co-sponsorship to go anywhere, but legislation introduced to juice the capacity of the federal government to give away surplus buildings to housing authorities and nonprofit housing developers. And that is something that could be of tremendous material benefit to the District of Columbia, and we should do everything possible to help that happen.
Paul, I was wondering if there were mechanisms or results or whatever for mixed income housing in the Philadelphia City Center.
I agree largely with what Tracy said. Am I at least visible? You just have my disembodied voice, so I understand at this point. You know,
can see you,
the
Paul.
convert buildings is extraordinarily expensive, but if there were incentives, for example, if you have a tax abatement and that tax abatement would be more generous if and only if you included affordable housing, you can create the incentives for developers to bring it. I think secondly, clearly, if there's publicly owned inventory and that can be given at low cost, that's a substantial reduction if and only if affordable housing is included. Rather than try to use a hammer here, I would use carrots basically to induce people to provide what we want, which is mixed income housing within our downtowns. Now, that said, newer product is always more expensive. And so you can't always have all of the affordable housing concentrated in your city center. In our city, we've got very diverse neighborhoods. As long as they're connected by transit to job opportunities, I think you achieve the biggest objective, which is economic inclusion.
Yeah, and I think Tracy's idea is very interesting, and I think it's a great idea. I think in the meantime, however, what the mayor is doing is kind of what Paul is saying, right? Which is the Housing in Downtown program to provide incentives. I can tell you that right now, what I hear from people is that it's very expensive. Like the numbers are still not working out for them, and to a large degree, it's a function of interest rates and access to capital. But the abatements just became available for at the end of March. And so I think over the next couple of months, we'll probably see more announcements. I know that many people are looking at it and are doing the economics analysis, and some have applied. But I want to kind of take that picture out even more, because when we talk about an inclusive neighborhood where all kinds of people, all generations, families, and other things live, it's obviously it's a function of economics, but there are these other elements, right? Like, is there a school nearby? Is there a park? And I think that those things really, and the way our downtown is right now, we have some parks. We don't have very many. Are they child friendly? Well, no, they're National Park Service parks. And, you know, we kind of need to look at that and reimagine that. Do we have grocery stores? Well, we have a couple in West End, you know, and Foggy Bottom, but we don't have quite the family serving kind of environment there. Do we have schools? No, we kind of really don't have enough. So affordability is clearly a function, but there's even a greater world around the affordability and around that building, that it's not an island unto itself, that I think we really have to think about if that's what we really are going to do.
Clearly, there's a level of intentionality that has to
Yes.
happen with all of this.
Yes.
One of the things I was impressed with about what Philadelphia did, which I think Washington has the possibility of, but wasn't as closely incorporated into the action plan, was tying to existing neighborhoods like West End and DuPont Circle and Penn Quarter, and, you know, really sort of expanding those in a neighborhoody kind of way, as opposed to just, I don't know, it feels very random the way some of this all might happen. So I think you had, Leona, had mentioned that there's some thinking about that.
Yeah. Nina Albert, the deputy mayor, wants to lay out these nodes a little bit more. And one of the big questions is where would the residential conversions now occur? Where does it make sense? I think most people feel that they will logically, but you know, how intentionally, I guess is your point, but that they would logically exist and be created near DuPont, Foggy Bottom, West End, but not exclusively. What we're seeing in the neighborhood from people who are looking at it, the L is right at 20th and L, which is not far. It's on the far western part of the Golden Triangle, right up against West End for the most part. Another building that has announced intent to become a residential building is 2100M, which is the huge, triangle building right there at the edge of West End. They haven't, really planned out how many units and things. They are looking at that very closely right now. Another one that has announced intent and has applied for the abatements is 1133 19th Street, which is the old Verizon building. You all probably know the one I mean, just maybe about 2 blocks south of the Circle on 19th. So those are kind of growing and announcing in areas where we think that they would naturally. There's some rumors of one at 2100 block of K, which is right at Washington Circle. So those seem to be emerging in a logical way, as we would expect. And then what we're seeing closer to the Farragut Square area is, and some of these are rumors and not quite publicly announced yet, but are a couple uses that are hotel uses, and extended stay hotel, short-term residence, which seems also kind of that it makes sense for that area because of the White House and the huge, the scale of the buildings and the more corporate feel there.
Could you move your mic a little closer?
Okay, I wonder if, yes, let me just hold.
People are having trouble hearing you.
Thanks. Okay, let me talk into it. So actually, I'm kind of curious. I know that the city has some rules about vacancies. I'm wondering if we have any actually all vacant buildings in the bids that are looking at this, and what do you do about? I mean, that's a real vibe killer for an area to have that kind of vacancy.
And we have several that are fully vacant. There's one that has been working on getting leased, 1875 Penn. They are actively working on getting that building leased. Hopefully he will have something to announce soon. 1133 19th is totally vacant. It was kind of a single tenant building, and that's the one that it's applying for abatement. 2100M is vacant, and will become a residential building. In the meantime, we've activated 2100M with Artomatic. They were there for 5 weeks. I would love to do more activations of buildings. I would love to create an art hub or something like that. We're willing to work with partners that will provide funding or a thing, and we will facilitate it as much as we can.
Are there tax consequences that something that
So
vacancy?
if the building is actively leasing, like I don't know if you've seen 1875 Penn, but it just, everything on it says actively leasing. I mean, they even have the price of per square foot listed on the building. They've essentially wrapped the building. 1133 19th is there. They've applied for abatement. So, I think we're at a point where we're all in an unfortunate situation and we're all trying to get out of it. But I don't know that changing the tax rate for a building that is actively trying to change is the solution. Now, if we get into a situation whereby people are sitting on buildings for fun of it, which I don't think we're going to get to, then we can, then perhaps there's a punitive approach. But I think right now everybody's trying really hard.
With things going into bankruptcy, reverting to banks or
We've
things
had
like that.
several foreclosures. We've had 5 foreclosures. We have 12 buildings on what's called the CoStar lender watch list, and that's where the loan amount exceeds the value of the building. And so the lenders are kind of looking at it. I think the problem is so widespread that lenders are really working with ownerships to work something out, all in hopes that things will change, like interest rates.
I'd love to add a couple points here. The first is that vacancy taxes in a commercial context are just something I would never recommend, because all that does is incentivize the landlord to rent to anybody in order to get the problem to go away. So the landlord stops looking for the best tenant and takes any tenant. It's gonna be a lot of neon lights downtown if we decide to go that route. The Revenue Commission took a look at adopting a land value tax, and that is something that could really have addressed this, because even buildings that have fallen to essentially zero value, aren't generating any income, they're still sitting on very valuable land, and that value is the value that we should continue to tax. But we can conceptually get at that still in the appraisal process by making sure that land is appraised correctly. We already separately appraise land and buildings in the district, and so we should just make sure that we're doing that correctly.
Yes, usually assessments are so far behind taxing. I'm curious if Philadelphia dealt with vacancy. I assume that would have been quite some time ago, but if you had dealt with vacancies in Philadelphia in some particular way, Paul?
Look, I'm all in favor of planning the downtown and picking strategic nodes. We need to do that. But I also believe that if you keep your abatement simple and as of right, you induce the market to work. We have a 10-year tax abatement for the conversion of any vacant office or industrial building as of right. And it doesn't need to be in a special zone. And that was hugely powerful. People would empty out the building of the last 10%. Those people would move into another building, and the building would create construction jobs, and people would move in. And we have dramatically diversified downtown land use in the last 20 years by doing that. We're in a very unique, very challenging mode, which I think both Leona and Tracy highlighted. Interest rates are high, supply chains are really strained, costs are up. So we have a typical downturn that's been exacerbated by COVID and exacerbated by a set of conditions that will pass. It's very painful, but all the things that Leona is doing right now just to activate spaces temporarily, those aren't long-term solutions, but they're very important short-term solutions to add life, to get people to look at the space. But the demand to live in our city centers is incredibly high. And, not to simplify this, we had a long-term downtown population, but, the most likely people to move into apartments are young people in their 20s. The first thing they get is dogs, so you need dog parks. Then they have babies and you have strollers. Then you need playgrounds, and soon you need to start worrying about the schools. I mean, demography, life cycles, and real estate work together. And that's overly simplistic. But, we created parks for children when there was a demand for them. We also have parks for children right at the center of the transit system, so we're bringing people downtown. But I would keep it really simple and not try to overplan where abatements are allowed. We have a real estate crisis. We need to take some of that surplus inventory out of office, create hotel, create residential. The more diversified Washington's downtown land use is, the more vibrant that city will be.
I would also add to that before throwing money at the problem, we should try getting out of the way. The biggest barrier to building new housing in the District of Columbia is TOPA, not the cost of doing conversions downtown. So we should fix TOPA and see what happens before we just start housing in downtown.
Is it in the current Budget Support Act that there is a restriction on? I'm sorry. If the current Budget Support Act proposal from the mayor is talking about not applying TOPA for the first 10 years, I think. So,
I mean, I think that's a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, but.
Say again, Paul? Oh, Tenants Opportunity
Paul,
to Purchase Act. Yeah, so one of the other proposals is to, in the Budget Support Act, is to incentivize offices to convert to Class A and to or other commercial uses through a like a tax freeze, I guess. Seems like we would want like a diversification of the kinds of uses downtown, activities downtown, and not all Class A office buildings. I'm trying to understand the rationale, I guess, behind that.
Sure. Look, office is a very desirable land use for downtown. It's by far the densest land use of any land use out there. You cannot replace an office with one apartment because a typical office worker in the District of Columbia might consume 200 square feet, and an apartment is like 650 to 1,000 square feet. So unless we're planning to triple or quadruple the size of every building in downtown DC, we are giving up density of activity every time we give up offices because they are such a dense land use. So modernizing our office product is a smart policy that makes sense. In New York, the city has already implemented a program called MCore that is doing this exact same thing. It's way cheaper than converting an office to a different use. So the tax abatement you offer is much less generous, right? It's a very reasonable size. And the demand that New York is seeing for the program is very strong.
If I can kind of piggyback too on what Tracy said, the portion of the BSA is office to anything else, right? And it acknowledges that there may be conversions to art and culture. I kind of think we need in the Golden Triangle some type of an anchor building of some sort, not necessarily the scale of an arena or whatever, but I do think that there needs to be, we need more things to bring people to our neighborhood. But to this point about Class A office, and it was, as Tracy said, and also it was in Paul's presentation, this idea that the office is not necessarily dead, we just have to make it a destination and get people there. And that's what I see. And we look very closely at our metrics in the Golden Triangle. And going into COVID, last quarter of 2019, our B office product, which is the older, the vintage 1980s Golden Triangle kind of building, I mean, generally that's what it is. And 75% of our office stock is B. That was at 12% vacancy. As of the end of the last quarter, it was at 28% vacancy.
And it can go higher.
Right. It's going higher.
It's going to 100,
go
baby.
higher. It's going to go higher. And an RA was at, I think it was at 16, and it's at 16 now. So I think we're going to even get to a point when we see a little bit more return to office, we start to see a little supply out of the office market where we're going to wish that we had trophy space for all of these international institutions that we're going to be bringing in and innovation. But I think we are definitely going to wish that we had some trophy office space. It's going to be a couple years, but we're going to get there.
Really interesting. I think we want to go to the audience. So Aiden is going to...
Have a hot mic?
We got a lot of hands up.
Do we have a hot mic? Okay. So ground rules, we talked about this, especially after last month's presentation. Questions should only take 1 minute. Context and questions, 1 minute. Think about the time constraints we're facing, and it squeezes other people from being able to ask questions if you take more time than that. No speeches, questions. Thank you. 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I am concerned about the emphasis on trophy buildings, hotels, entertainment districts for visitors and tourists, which is what I heard a lot of 2 Saturdays ago at the Gallery Place Chinatown Task Force presentation, and I'm hearing kind of similar things tonight. You cannot get a revitalized downtown without people living there. And if you put that third behind parklets and the sort of stage set beautifying that is a lot of what I heard from the task force, yes, why are you not focusing on keeping the Wallach house apartment building in Chinatown as an apartment place, a residence? It's about to be bought by a hotel. And why are you not considering buying or finding a way to incentivize DC to buy the Hotel Harrington, which is being bid on by various hotel bidders, but they're not able to close the deal?
Karen, it's okay. Got the question.
All right, I'm totally ready to answer this question, which I love. Okay, so first off, I'm Chinese American and I grew up in this city before a Verizon Center. So I don't actually really want to be lectured by anyone about what's happened to Chinatown or what might happen in the future. Wallach House is a promise that the city made to the Chinese American community. And if this city can't keep that promise, it won't be the first time that this city has broken promises. I mean, remember Arthur Capper? I mean, this is a pattern that this city has repeated many times. It's not okay, but I'm not a part of breaking that promise. So I question who the you is in your question. That said, the point of that slide that Leona showed with like the different shapes, you know, the kind of like the different nodes, is that DC's downtown is disproportionately very large relative to, in terms of land area, relative to a typical US downtown because of the Height Act. And so we actually have like 4 to 5 downtowns, little downtowns. And so we can do a lot of office to residential conversion in a place like Golden Triangle, where there's already a Trader Joe's. And frankly, I would love to live next to that Trader Joe's, right? And then in a place like Gallery Place, Chinatown, where we have these major destinations like the arena, these huge museums, the convention center, right? These are visitor-oriented assets that are very close to each other in space and that make sense to link. You know, like, would I have given up our Chinatown for those things? No, but it has happened. And so it makes sense if those assets are there to build on them in place. And so I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time on that one. Regarding the second half of your question was about buying the Harrington Hotel. So, you know, I showed the regional continuum of care, but that's just one thing that cities that are effective in doing something about homelessness do. Another thing that cities need to do is buy old apartment buildings and hotels in order to convert them into shelter, congregate shelter, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing. And the city has made attempts to buy buildings, like, for example, a dorm in Georgia from GW, and should try to buy other things too. But the city should not try to buy the Harrington Hotel if the price isn't right? Because resources are limited. And so you know, I think it's just so that's an idea that should be on the table, because I don't think that our region is doing everything that we could be doing about homelessness.
I want to challenge the affordable housing, and I mean the idea that height is the problem, because we're very strong on how
Well, I didn't say it
important
was
height
a
is.
problem. I just said it's why our downtown is so big.
No, I think our downtown is so big is because in 2017 they rewrote the zoning regulations and tripled the size of what we call downtown. So we now have the Wharf and City Center and Noma and across the Anacostia up to St. Elizabeth being called downtown in a zoning parlance, which then ends up I think it drew away a lot of the tenants from the old downtown.
Oh yeah, but I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about
Right.
the downtown DC bid and Golden Triangle, even just that area, is much bigger than it would be in a typical US city, because the buildings in a typical US city are much taller.
I've been asked to expedite the process by holding on to the mic while the question's being asked. Yes, seriously.
First of all, thanks. Oh, this was a really good presentation, and everybody was really pithy and great slides and everything. And Leona, thank you so much for the work that you've done greening the Golden Triangle for years now. It's been spectacular. I wish DuPont Circle had some of that. The question's coming. Very short. The buildings that where the sweet potato pie, I think, was that rent free? First of all, and second of all, the building that's being built at 20th and L, how did they get funding and financing? Evidently started a little bit earlier, and were there city abatements and so forth?
So DC Sweet Potato Cake, under our pop-up program, what we require of the owners is that they provide 3 months of free rent. And what we ask the retailers to do clearly is to pay for your utilities and have insurance, right? And then anything that the owners negotiated with the business was between the two of them after that, right? And so I can tell you that the rents, if they do exist, a lot of them are based on percentage. And the landlords understand how hard it is to get retail into their ground floor. And most of the ones that I know are really kind of making concessions. In some cases, I think there are some longtime businesses that are not paying any rent. But it's for the quality of life, for the rest of the tenants in the building and for the neighborhood. The L is, that was a situation where the building had one tenant. It was the Peace Corps. They moved out all at the same time. They moved in the fall of 2019. In December, their lease expired. And at that point, the idea was that they'd make it a nicer office building. They couldn't get financing. Now, the other thing about that building, though, that is different, so it was unusual because it was fully vacant. That was number one. The second thing that was unusual, it was a building conducive to conversion because it has light and windows on all 4 sides. The floor plate is relatively small. You know, we have some floor plates that are like a whole block, like International Square building. That, you know, that's a different thing. He also talked about the type of construction in the building made it more feasible. Post-tension, I don't know, that is not my world, but he when I hear him speak, he talks about how that really made the price more affordable for him to do the conversion. And then finally, that building has been in the family for decades and decades and decades, and so it wasn't highly leveraged. And so these are all like factors that came together that it lined up, and they don't always line up for buildings. And of course, you know, I was on the phone with him throughout the pandemic trying to get him to convert the building, and so maybe that helped a little bit too. So.
One of you said that I think there are 6 major universities with residences. I think there are many more than 6 that in DC, but maybe in the Golden Triangle there are only 6, or in the downtown Bid or whatever. Yeah. My question is, do we know how many students or faculty and students or whatever, people associated, are there, and where do they live?
Yeah. So I don't know the number of students and faculty citywide. I don't even have that in the Golden Triangle. Where do they live is a very good question because, and we've convened the universities that have moved into and created a presence in the Golden Triangle. Many of them, most of them are graduate programs. Some of them are programs for, you know, take a semester or a year in Washington, D.C., types of programs. We asked them how we could be of help. public safety was something that, because they have to answer to the parents back in wherever, and the perception of crime. But they also talked about one of the ways is to help figure out a way for them to address housing. We asked them, were you talking about dorms? And they said, no, any apartment building that had the units that were the right size. We asked them, would they want their own building? And they all said, no, we would all be willing to work together. It's just we don't really have that supply that's available adjacent. But there is a lot of supply in DuPont, West End, other places. But yeah, in fact, I do know that one of the first 3 tenants to lease at the L was a GW student. So the other was a retired empty nest couple, and the other one was a worker. So kind of interesting.
I can add to that, like anecdotally, I think it's like pretty well known that like a lot of AU students live in just over the border in Montgomery County, because there's a lot of apartments in Friendship Village, and that a lot of Howard students are moving out to Hyattsville. So, but they're doing that because the city actually like won't let the universities build dorms, and then the kinds of apartment buildings that it's, like the kinds of developers that build student housing, once again, like that's totally incompatible with TOPA exposure. So we haven't created a regulatory environment that allows these students to be housed in the city. So we just give them away to neighboring jurisdictions. They're all just living right over the border.
You had mentioned before the Trader Joe's, but I'm wondering if there are plans to encourage other large food chains like Safeway, Giant, Wegmans to look at the Golden Triangle area for potential locations where they could build a store, or is that being left more to the developers to follow up on?
One of the things that we recommended in the Downtown Action Plan, we have a lot of recommendations, but one of them is that they look at incentives for a grocery store and other neighborhood serving amenities. But I think we have to get a little bit more of a mass in order to really make the argument. I think it's still accessible to go to the Trader Joe's or the Whole Foods or whichever one. So
Yeah, I mean, those are incredible options. I think, what I heard a lot of excitement about was the possibility of getting an H Mart in Chinatown. Come on!
that would be cool.
Can I connect a few of these things together? I mean, New York City, my younger daughter went to school in Chicago, in Philadelphia. We have tons of colleges and universities. Young people animate the city. They stay up later than all of us who have white hair, but so be it. They're filling bars and restaurants. And guess what? You get a certain percentage of them choosing just to stay in your city and live there and work there. So that's a really key thing. Number one is to encourage students, to encourage whether it's dormitories or apartments in the city, and welcome that. Two, our universities have been a driver of life sciences investment. This is filling up buildings that we never knew what to do with before. Three, this whole issue of supermarkets. I mean, I moved to Philadelphia in 1976. We had about 80,000 people living in our downtown, and we had 4 grocery stores. We have 210,000 people living in the downtown today, and we have 43 grocery stores, right? Supermarkets. They follow the customer. You can't make a grocery store come sell when there's no customers. So focus on growing residential. But I completely agree with what Leona said. You're not giving up on office. You need to be recruiting different types of tenants, different types of uses, so that you want a mixed use downtown that has young people, that has empty nesters, that has families with kids. You want office buildings, but you also want residential apartment buildings. And Washington's problem is single use blocks that are very, very large without a lot of animation. And part of that is the design of the city. But the more you break that up, the more animation at street level. There's a lot of things Jane Jacobs taught us a long time ago that Washington needs to read that book again.
It's true.
Yes. Are any of the speakers proposing that we abolish or modify the Height Act?
Should we abolish the Height Act? I think it's a good idea.
I mean, obviously, we're not Washington, D.C., but we had height controls in Philadelphia, and we wanted no building should be taller than William Penn's hat on the top of City Hall that was put there in 1901. And it was almost a crime when Bill Rouse proposed to build a building taller. We went through a city planning process and we said there are important view corridors that we wanted to preserve. There are important landmarks that we wanted to see. But frankly, having high density buildings, whether they were condos or office buildings, gives us the density in the downtown that adds the vitality that causes people to want to live and work there. You wouldn't want to block the view of the Washington Monument or the Capitol or the White House. But I bet if you did some basic planning, you could find there are places where higher density would not block the critical views. Now, that may be sacrilegious in Washington, D.C. We went through this process and we're a much healthier and more vibrant city because of it.
What's your tallest building?
Yeah, our tallest building is probably the Comcast Tower today. I don't have the height, but it is probably twice as high as City Hall. But you still see City Hall down the Benjamin Franklin Parkway from East Market Street, West Market Street, North Broad Street, and we're in the process of relighting it for the 4th of July. It's a central landmark. It's important. You have more than we do, but high density brings foot traffic. It brings demand. It brings people who want to live and work there.
Yes. I have a question about the Artomatic building. They have very large floor plates, especially at the north end, and I'm just wondering, when they convert to residential, are they going to have to saw cut part of the building out, or do they think they can retain the building floor plates as they are and possibly add vertical addition on the roof, maybe in laminated timber or something like that, for increase the residential size? Thank you.
I think the question was about floor plates and the idea of cutting
About 2100M.
2100M. Okay, and I'm sorry because I didn't
Automatic.
quite hear it too well.
The automatic building, do you have to cut out hollow out some of the floor plate?
Oh, yeah. Well, so 2100M is looking at what the solution is. They're not quite sure. They're not sure whether they have to cut out anything in order to kind of bring in the window views into bedrooms and to other things. And that is one of the things that, in fact, that's why they're not ready to look at applying for abatements yet, because they haven't fully fleshed that out. So they may have to, and they may not.
Carol, Shelley, how much time do we have left? How many more?
One more.
One more.
I wonder if Paul Levy could comment on the different morphology and the jurisdictional boundaries of Washington versus Philadelphia, because we have Manhattan and then we have the outer boroughs, but we're different jurisdictions, and that affects things. And our walkability, you can live in Kalorama and walk downtown. So we live there. I felt like I lived downtown, and there's plenty of transit here. So, you know, our affordable housing is just outside our district boundaries, but we're not acting as one unit. You'd like to comment on that effect?
At the last forum, I think somebody made the flip side version of that, which is to say you're both a city and a state and a county. So it's probably easier for you to change your regulations than it is for those of us who are cities inside of counties, inside of states. I hear what you're saying, and you're absolutely right. You are a unique entity, and our economy, our transportation is regional. But nobody's going to change the boundaries of Washington. Nobody's going to listen to my recommendations to break your height controls. I think you need to deal with the reality you have. But I think diversifying the downtown is really key. And I'll just make a really minor point. There are some buildings whose floor plates just won't lend themselves to residential. And then there's some incredible creative developers Not, you don't need to simply pour out the inside. You put this health club and the exercise room in there, and young people want to look at themselves in the mirror while they're working out. They don't need to look out a window. I mean, literally find those uses that can go into the core in residential buildings that don't need windows. It doesn't solve the problem, but let your architects and let your developers get creative with these buildings, and they'll come up with some interesting solutions. And then you'll have some buildings that don't have a visible future.
Okay, I think this, Shelley is going to wrap it up for us. Thank you, Paul, for joining us. Bon voyage. Appreciate your time.
Well, thank you.
And thank you for our other two panelists, too. Wonderful.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Leona. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you for the audience, and thank you for coming. I hope the takeaway here is that you learned something tonight, and hopefully the Committee of 100 can stay connected with all of you who aren't already connected. But anyway, and thank you to the panelists. Thank you for Carol for organizing this. She's done a wonderful job over 2 years now pulling together these conversations. So thank you. We have refreshments in the lobby here, so please join us.